Jose, feel free to speak. Jose?
Jose, you're muted.
Oh, my apologies. I was muted. Hi, buenas. My name is Jose Romero, and alongside Alejandra Esparza, I'll be providing interpretation today. Y junto a Alejandra Esparza, voy a estar brindando interpretación esta noche. If you're joining from a computer, in order to access the interpretation, what you'll do is select the globe you see at the bottom of your screen, select the language channel in which you would like to participate, and you can mute the original audio. Buenas, mi nombre es José Romero, uso el pronombre ella y les, y junto a Alejandra voy a estar brindando interpretación esta noche. Si se están uniendo a través de una computadora, solo tienen que seleccionar el globo terráqueo que ven al fondo de la pantalla y seleccionar el canal de audio en cual les gustaría participar y luego seleccionar finalizado. Van a hacer el mismo proceso si se están uniendo a través de un celular, nomás que van a buscar esos 3 puntitos, luego seleccionar donde dice más, interpretación de idiomas y el canal de audio en cual te gustaría participar. You'll do something similar if you're joining from a cell phone. You'll just click those 3 little dots, click more, language interpretation, and then the language channel in which you would like to participate. A reminder about interpretation, please speak slowly, one language at a time and one speaker at a time. And we hope you enjoy your session today. Un recordatorio sobre la interpretación, por favor, hablen lentamente, un lenguaje a la vez y un orador a la vez. Y deseamos que disfruten de su sesión. If you have any questions, please send myself or Alejandra a direct message. Si tienen cualquier pregunta, nomás mándame a mí o a Alejandra un mensaje. Y gracias. Thanks.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the 5th event in the 2-week-long conference, Informal, Criminalized, Precarious, Sex Workers Organizing Against Barriers. My name is Lorelei Lee, and I'm a sex worker activist, writer, and organizer. I'm a co-founder of the Disabled Sex Workers Coalition, a founding member of both the Upstate New York Sex Workers Coalition and Decrim Massachusetts, a researcher and analyst with Hacking Hustling, and a Justice Catalyst Fellow at the Cornell Gender Justice Clinic. The Sex Workers Organizing Against Barriers Conference is co-facilitated by the Disabled Sex Workers Coalition, Hacking Hustling, Cornell Law School Gender Justice Clinic, Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard, and the Center for Information, Technology, and Public Life at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. I am so appreciative of our conference co-organizers, Rachel Kuo, Danielle Blunt, Zara Stardust, and Tiffany So, as well as of our conference co-sponsors, the Berger International Legal Studies Program, the Dorothy S. Clark Program in Feminist Jurisprudence, the Cornell Labor Law Clinic, the Cornell student chapters of Outlaw, National Lawyers Guild, Women's Law Coalition, and the Black Law Students Association, Justice Catalyst, the Red Umbrella Fund, and the Asian American Feminist Collective. Special thanks also to Livia Folds, Naomi Loren, Eves, and Alexis Briggs for all of your work and support. And thank you to all of you who've donated via the Eventbrite page. Our co-sponsors and our public donations ensure that we can follow one of our core ethics in this organizing, which is to pay people for their labor. In particular, sex worker organizers who do so much work that is unrecognized and unfunded. As I think you all can probably tell, this conference was born out of a lot of collective work and a lot of collective dreaming. For each of our conference panels, live closed captioning and streaming to YouTube are available, and the recordings and transcripts will be available afterward at hackinghustling.org, where you can also find a schedule of the events in the conference. And after the conference, you'll also be able to find links to the donation sites for each of the panelists who have provided them in order to further support their work. Our community agreements are adapted from the Asian American Feminist Collective, Brave Space, Collective Sex, alt-div hummingbirds, and by us for us, and are as follows. First, to bring in our histories and to speak from our own experiences. Second, to be committed to each other's collective learning and growing. Third, to be open to learning. Fourth, to not share pirated work, including books, pornography, and any other art forms. Fifth, to respect the diversity of our identities, which particularly for the purposes of this conference includes not assuming the identities of organizers and activists for whom sharing every element of our lived experience is not always safe. This also means please do not dead name or dox anyone. In other words, do not share someone else's personal information without consent. Sixth, to practice not using ableist language. And seventh, to prioritize caring for ourselves and each other. This last agreement in particular is a disability justice issue, and both our panelists and our audience members should feel free to do whatever you need to do in order to care for yourselves during this conference, including standing up, moving around, lying down, or even disengaging from any of the events at any time. Many of our panelists are zooming in from North and South America, where we are living on stolen land that is still and always indigenous land. To learn more about the land that you're living on, you can look to the resources provided by the Native Governance Center, which are available at nativegov.org. Today's panel, Sex Work and Migration, will feature a conversation about sex work and migration, the association of migrant sex work with human trafficking, the racialized tropes inherent in that association, and the increased likelihood of migrant sex work in the face of climate crisis. Our panel features Elaine Lamb, Cecilia Gentili, Aneri Zapata, Karina Bravo-Nera, and will be moderated by Tiffany. Today we'll have about 60 minutes of conversation with our speakers, and then we'll open up the floor for Q&A if we have time. Please, though, feel free to use the chat and Q&A functions on Zoom to ask questions throughout, and then we'll see what we can get to at the end. And now I'm so thrilled to introduce tonight's moderator and a powerhouse organizer, Tiffany, who is a freelance writer and producer whose work focuses on Asian American issues, sex work, gender, labor policy, and their many intersections. She is also a co-founder and leader of the Asian American Feminist Collective. So welcome, Tiffany.
Thank you so much, Lorelai. Thank you for having me and for everyone who's joining us right now. I'm just really happy to be here and in the space. I want to start off by warning everyone that this conversation is going to feel short because of how much each of these panelists contributes to their sex working communities. But in dreaming up this panel, I wanted to prioritize getting everyone in the same space and in dialogue with each other over getting into every single issue deeply or answering every single question. This Zoom panel is just like radiating with warmth, power, wisdom, and care. I thank all of the panelists for joining us at this conference. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce each of them briefly, and then we can get into conversation. First, we have Aneri Zapata, who was born in a small Black Garifuna community called Sambo Creek in Honduras. She is a transgender Black woman, a primary education teacher, a feminist, and an LGBTQIA+ rights and human rights activist. She arrived in the US in 2015, fleeing systemic oppressions of her country, which affected the Black community to a greater extent. This prompted her to develop actions and resources for the LGBTQIA+ migrant community in the US. Aneri began her activism with protests, conferences, social platforms, and in the courts, testifying in cases of human rights violations of LGBTQIA+ and Afro-descendant populations. This connected her with BLMP, or Black LGBT+ Migrant Project, and QDEP, the Queer Detainee Empowerment Project, where she began working in 2018 as a leader of the Garifuna sector. Next, we have Cecilia Gentili, who is a human rights activist and the founder of Transgender Equity Consulting. Cecilia is from Argentina and came to the US seeking asylum as a transgender woman and was undocumented for 10 years. Her experiences surviving arrests, immigrant detention, and constantly being targeted by policing as an undocumented migrant sex worker has driven her to ensure that all people living on the margins are provided with access to dignity and respect in all spaces. Cecilia has done transformative work with the Apachal Community Health Center, GMHC, the world's first and leading provider of HIV and AIDS prevention, and Decrim NY, a coalition working towards the decriminalization, decarceration, and destigmatization of people in the sex trade, which she co-founded. And then next we have Elaine Lamb, who is the co-founder and executive director of Butterfly, Asian and migrant sex workers support network. She has advocated for sex workers, migrant labor, and gender justice for over 20 years. Elaine co-founded Butterfly in 2014 after moving from Hong Kong to Canada, where she saw a need for activism around the specific needs and concerns of migrant sex workers. Butterfly started as a support network for Asian and migrant sex workers in Canada to address the challenges they face working against anti-sex work legislation that criminalizes the purchase of sex, advertising sexual services, and communicating in public. Last, we have Karina Bravo Nera, who is an Ecuadorian organizer, the leader of Las Mujeres Trabajadoras del Sexo de Machala, women sex workers of Manchala, and coordinator of La Plataforma de Personas que Ejercen Trabajo Sexual, or PLAPERTS. She has worked in the prevention and eradication of trafficking since 1998 and is part of the Gender Violence Eradication Table. She started her work after being invited to be a part of La Sala, a safe space for women where she was trained in HIV/AIDS prevention. She founded the first organization of women sex workers in the province of El Oro, Colectivo Flor de Azalea, where she began to fight for rights to move freely on the street, denouncing police violence, and managing to end raids and arbitrary detentions. She is dedicated to serving survivors of sexual exploitation, trafficking, and sexual violence within organizations like Fundación Quimera, Casa Linda, Dueña de Mí, and Rosa Vivar Arias. So thank you all for joining and being here with all of your power. As I start with my first question, I invite everyone to speak a little slower than usual and to leave space between sentences and thoughts to give interpreters and the captioner some time to catch up. And I hope I've been modeling this okay. I'm sorry if I'm speaking a little faster because I'm a little nervous. And so to start off, I just wanted to hear from everybody once first. And I wanted to ask the question, in your experience working with migrant sex workers in your respective spaces, what are some of the biggest challenges that the community still faces? And then alternately, I would love to hear of one major win that you've been able to celebrate pushing toward a more liberatory future, since I don't want to just talk about the bad stuff. I also want to talk about how we win. And I would love to start with Cecilia.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I am just so happy to be here with all of you. It's such an honor to be with such an amazing organizers. Thank you for having me. So, as a person who, migrated to another country as a sex worker, I faced a lot of issues. I think the consistent problem that we have is police interactions. Police interactions continue to be a really, really important problem, especially when you are in that intersection where you are part of the sex trade, or you exchange sex for whatever you exchange in sex, and if you are not documented, because like arrest that could be considered minor, no arrest is minor. Every arrest is a violent and a traumatizing event. But whatever can be considered a minor arrest can end up having terrible repercussions for people if they are undocumented. And in my case, I ended up in deportation procedures after being arrested for purposes of loitering for purposes of prostitution, which could be considered a minor arrest. So that's why I'm saying it's not such a thing as a minor arrest. Every arrest is. So that intersection and the of being a sex worker, being a migrant, in the case of folks being undocumented, police interactions of any type continue to be the most present issue for us. And one of the things that we achieved, we in the state of New York, finally took down the loitering for purposes of prostitution legislation. So police cannot harass us for being if we are engaging in sex work or not, because actually that piece of legislation affected people who were not actually engaging in sex work. So that has been a great win for me and for the community. And the most important part is that it was added to the bill, the expunging of every arrest that people face in this case, which doesn't mean that just disappear from your records, but disappear from every record. It does not exist anymore. And because that was becoming a barrier for many undocumented folks looking to get some kind of status in the country. So that is something that gave me joy in the last couple of months.
Yes. Congratulations on that win, and thank you so much for everything that you did to push it forward. We're so grateful. And then next, I would love to invite Elaine to answer.
Yeah, so Butterfly is an Asian and migrant sex worker support network in Canada. So, and I think like many migrant sex workers all over the world, just like what Cecilia just said, facing the issue with the police, particularly with the precarious immigration status, with the language barrier, with the discrimination, and also like the repressive law and policing, so including the criminal law against sex work, but also like even people work in the business like massage parlor. So that is all kind of repressive law, make people really, really difficult, isolated, and vulnerable. But I think when we keep saying that how migrant sex worker is being isolated, oppressed, but at the same time, we can see how beautiful and how powerful with the community. No matter how difficult, is people still, using different way to survive, different way to struggle. And for many, many people actually work in massage parlor or sex industry is much, much, much powerful resistance of other oppression than like work in factory, than work in many like restaurant. And I think this is something we also need to recognize when we talk about the challenge at the community facing, but we also need to see how strong, how powerful with the community work together. And yeah, so as I said that like the discrimination and the policing is make people feel very, very challenging. And particularly in Canada, last few years, there is a lot of targeting of massage parlor. So, and people may know it very well, like 8 people in US being murdered, including 6 Asian women. So, and the anti-trafficking group is keep targeting the massage parlor because they are being seen as related to sex work. So no matter people do sex work or not, they are still harmed by the policing, harmed by the sex worker law. And one of the challenge is like, because of the stigma, because of the criminalization. So there is also the tension between the community, like where the people do sex work or the people work in massage parlor. And I think one of the successful things Butterfly have done is really build a solidarity, no matter what service people offer in massage parlor, including hand job, including blow job, including full sex workers or whatever, that people still come together. And in 2019, the city of Toronto trying to shut down the massage parlor, 2,000 workers may lost the job. So that like actually over 300 workers went to City Hall and tell city, we are not traffic victim. We need our work. We do not want our business to shut down, and their mobilization also bring like a lot of allies to come to support. The bylaw is still not good, but at least they can stop the process to shut down the business. And they also have changed some of the enforcement. So for example, people in massage parlor was not allowed to lock the door because they want the police power, they want the power from bylaw enforcement to inspect more than the safety of the worker, right? That's why they design that actually the law enforcement can come in any time, then you will get charged and you need to get fined and get ticket when you need to be punished if you lock the door to protect your safety. So with the advocacy work of the worker that the city of Toronto is willing to say that they will not charge the people when the people do this practice. So even this is a minor change, but that is meaningful because we have witnessed how sex worker is being neglected, even they are trying to participate in decision-making process of the policy. And I think that is something we still need to continue to do, continues to fight and make the voices of sex worker being heard and leading the direction of the policy. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Elaine. You've really also led the way when it comes to organizing for migrant Asian sex workers and massage parlor workers everywhere, including for folks like Red Canary Song. So we really appreciate you. And Rachel dropped the link again for Butterfly's 8 Calls for Justice, if folks can check that out. I would love to pass it to Aneri to also answer the question.
Ok, hola, buenas tardes. Agradezco por este espacio, un espacio en el cual me siento bastante segura de poder hablar. He trabajado durante estos últimos 2 años con varias personas que han ejercido el trabajo sexual. Yo nunca he sido una trabajadora sexual, pero sí estoy de cerca con personas que lo hacen. Y uno de los grandes desafíos es que no hay muchas organizaciones que respalden a las trabajadoras sexuales. Es como que todo el tiempo tienen que estar en las calles o exigiendo de, óyeme, cuando pases una ley, recuérdate que existo yo. Es como que normalmente no se incluye, así como nos pasa a los negros, a quienes simplemente son migrantes, a las mujeres, y hay diversidades, pero hay diversidades de minorías, pero ser trabajadora sexual es una minoría entre la minoría. Entonces, que hagan como que no están es algo bastante cruel. Uno de los desafíos que también son grandes es la falta de comprensión del por qué o el para qué están ahí, porque hace muy pocos meses atrás, ahora mismo en este 2021, hubo una persona que acababa de entrar al país, una persona transgénero, tenía cáncer o tiene cáncer y no encontraba un trabajo, y me dice una vez que estábamos conversando y me dice, yo he escuchado de las trabajadoras sexuales que están en tal área y yo me voy a ir para ahí. Yo estaba pensando, es una persona que debería estar pensando, en sus quimioterapias, o en un médico vino a Estados Unidos buscando de ayuda y no hay, no hay. Estados Unidos niega la existencia de estas personas y lo hace cuando les niega un seguro social cuando salen de los centros de detenciones, después de detenerlas durante varios meses. Algunas personas se quedan ahí por años y salen traumadas, endeudadas, y no tienen un número de seguro social para poder trabajar. Entonces, es como que el mismo Estado, las mismas leyes siguen orillando a las personas a que tengan que como recurso humano o como recurso de vida ir al trabajo sexual. Yo puedo preguntar en varias de las trabajadoras sexuales que yo conozco y ninguna me ha dicho, oh, no, cuando yo tenía 10 años yo soñaba crecer y ser trabajadora sexual, sino que ha sido una herramienta que han ido implementando para poder vivir, ¿no? Y entonces que la sociedad en general, que el gobierno, que las entidades que representan no reconozcan eso, es un desafío bastante fuerte, y que no haya representación de trabajadoras sexuales en el Congreso, en el gobierno de Nueva York, es también un desafío, porque yo siempre digo, a un negro, la única manera, el único que puede representarme a mí como mujer negra transgénero es otra mujer negra transgénero. Y si fuera trabajadora sexual, me tendría que representar otra trabajadora sexual, porque solo uno sabe lo que uno vive. Y muchas veces hay personas llevando la bandera o representando causas que nunca han vivido, sin darse la oportunidad de escuchar a quienes sufren, sin darse la oportunidad de saber qué es lo que sienten. Y no puedes ir enfrente llevando la bandera de algo que tú no has sentido. Se tiene que aprender a escuchar. Muchas veces tiene que aprender a sentarte y escuchar lo que otros están viviendo. Y como decía Cecilia hace poco, una de las grandes herramientas o de los logros que hemos dado es esta ley Walking While Trans, o caminando como transgénero. Yo hablo español. Es una ley que nos ha venido que les ha venido a respaldar bastante, pero de igual manera se queda vacía cuando estamos hablando de la comunidad migrante que no tiene un número de social, cuando estamos hablando de la comunidad que no habla inglés o tenemos cualquier otro acento. Cuando yo hablo inglés se dan cuenta de que yo no soy de este país. Entonces siempre es un riesgo estar en las calles cuando no hay leyes paralelas para todos, en las que todos podamos valer por igual. Pero podríamos tomar hasta el momento como una ventaja esta ley hasta que podamos abrir espacios a que no solo se pueda caminar, sino que se pueda hacer, y se pueda hacer con la total libertad del color de piel que tengamos, del título, del oficio que tengamos.
Yes, thank you so much, Aneri. Thank you for also bringing your experience into this space and for being truly an ally to all of your sex working comrades. I wanted to pass it on to Karina, who is joining us from Ecuador.
Sí, hola, hola, bueno, para mí es un gusto y un orgullo poder estar aquí con ustedes, compañeras, y poder compartir nuestras vivencias, ¿no? Creo que las mujeres trabajadoras sexuales hemos sido las primeras mujeres migrantes, migración interna, migración externa, dentro y fuera de la ciudad. Y esa situación nos ha puesto muchísimo en vulnerabilidad, en situación de riesgo. Uno de los grandes desafíos es que el Estado nos excluye a las mujeres trabajadoras sexuales, nos ven como ciudadanas de segunda clase, como ciudadanas que no tienen derecho. Y es más que eso, nos pone en mayor vulnerabilidad de vivir violencia. La violencia es la mayor cosa que ha impactado a las mujeres trabajadoras sexuales. Y mucho más esta violencia se observa justo en la pandemia del COVID, cuando el Estado ni siquiera no responde a la población de sus necesidades, y hemos sido las mismas líderes, las mismas trabajadoras sexuales, quienes hemos respondido a nuestras propias poblaciones, nuestras compañeras, con kit de alimento, con protecciones, con bioseguridad, haciendo incidencia inclusive al Estado, a las instituciones del Estado. Mirar que justo en la pandemia, cuando sale una campaña quédate en casa, pero en casa ¿con quién? Con el violentador, con el tratante, con el explotador, que muchas de nuestras compañeras se tuvieron que quedar encerradas en los lugares donde trabaja y que se ponen en mayor explotación económica, laboral, sexual, muchas de ellas, ¿no? Y toda esta industria del sexo con esta pandemia fue cerrada y el Estado no tener un programa social para decir qué vamos a hacer con esta población, con este sector que genera grandes sumas de dinero y que todo ese dinero va a la arca del Estado y que eso no es devuelto a las trabajadoras sexuales con programa de seguridad, de protección, alimento. Tenemos también el sector compañeras que viven con VIH-Sida, migrantes o del mismo país y el Estado eso no lo ve. Quienes lo estamos siempre viendo somos las trabajadoras sexuales. ¿Qué tenemos que celebrar? Celebrar muchas cosas. Celebrar que somos sobrevivientes en esta pandemia, que somos resilientes, que somos las que hemos salido a dar la cara para nuestra propia población y que justo esta pandemia ha hecho poner en el tapete toda esa inequidad, desigualdad que existe hacia el sector de las trabajadoras sexuales. Justo nosotros en esta pandemia, donde mayormente ha habido toda una ola de migración de mujeres venezolanas hacia nuestro país, inclusive de mujeres migrantes de países pobres llegando a otro país pobre, donde nos ha tocado ser más solidaria entre nosotros, compartir muchas cosas y romper esa brecha que a veces nos han puesto una sociedad machista y patriarcal, esa brecha de inequidad que como somos latinas o como somos migrantes de otro país, cada quien por su lado, no. Hemos logrado unirnos las compañeras, sea venezolana, ecuatoriana, para hacer una serie de campañas para posesionar nuestra voz, para fortalecer nuestra organización. Actualmente, desde el año pasado, tenemos una campaña Nuestras Vidas También Importa, porque ha habido casos de femicidio en mujeres trabajadoras sexuales, ha habido casos de violencia obstétrica a trabajadoras sexuales y especialmente por ser migrante, porque el Estado a través del Ministerio de Salud no presta atención a salud a las mujeres migrantes y es ahí que las mujeres trabajadoras sexuales hemos venido luchando y actualmente le hemos incidido mucho para que nuestras compañeras migrantes también estén en los servicios de salud, sean atendidas dentro de los servicios de salud. Ha crecido el número de mujeres trabajadoras sexuales migrantes y ahora mucho más jóvenes que tal vez no vinieron con el ánimo de hacer trabajo sexual, pero les toca para tratar de sobrevivir, para pagar el arriendo, para poderse alimentar, para poder comprar su medicamento, tienen hijos, tienen familia, entonces les toca hacer el trabajo sexual, aunque ellas no lo han querido, como muchas de ellas no han manifestado. Y nosotros incidir muchísimo, no en el Estado, porque el Estado no nos responde, sino incidir a organizaciones internacionales como ACNUR, CARI y otras organizaciones que nos den transferencias económicas, pequeños emprendimientos económicos, poderles responder a nuestra población que tiene una gran necesidad. Actualmente tenemos una campaña que se llama La Ruta Feminista, desde donde nosotros hacemos muchísimas cosas para posesionar la voz de las trabajadoras sexuales, para incidir en el tema de violencia, la violencia basada en género, que no solamente es la violencia física, sino la violencia psicológica que estamos viviendo las mujeres trabajadoras sexuales justo en este impacto del COVID y que el Estado no lo ve, no lo reconoce, no nos reconoce como ciudadanas con derechos y ahí estamos las mujeres trabajadoras sexuales, las profesionales del sexo, diciendo, aquí estamos presentes, somos mujeres, somos ciudadanas, votamos, sufragamos, contribuimos con los aportes a este Estado y el Estado tiene que respondernos a nosotros, no puede seguir invisibilizando a las mujeres trabajadoras del sexo.
Yes, thank you so much for that. And you make a great point, Karina, that sometimes the winning is also surviving. Sometimes it's just coming together, forming coalitions, and pushing against the system. And I know that Cecilia has to leave early, so I wanted to pose this Next question, a couple of options of questions, if you will, to Cecilia first, and then open up the floor. And I would love to let everyone be more conversational. But so a couple of questions are, that with the continued wars, US imperialism, climate change, and issues like unemployment and poverty worsening, we know that migration is going to be continuing to rise, and that the sex industry will expand and trafficking will become more prevalent. So a couple of things on that, how do we build movements and frameworks that hold the multiple ways that people encounter and survive different forms of violence and trauma, whether that is through policing or through trafficking. And then also migrant sex work often gets conflated with sex trafficking. So how has that flattened the perception or harmed migrant sex workers as well as trafficking survivors?
Well, thank you. And thank you, Nady, and thank you, Karina. Get out. I'm supposed to speak in English. So you all are amazing. And I am just so honored to be here with all of you, but with my sisters from Latin America. Un abrazo, un abrazo. So, well, to the question, I have to continue to highlight the fact of the danger of criminalization. Criminalization has been seen as a way to identify and support victims, I don't like to use the word victims because I was a person who was trafficked and I never considered myself a victim. I was involved in trafficking situations where I still had a certain level of power that I chose not to utilize because the situation worked for me in that way for a moment. So I know that some people do identify as victims. I prefer not to use it because not everybody who is in a trafficking situation identify as a victim. But for people who are or do experience trafficking situations, through my experience, I can say that policing has not worked. I remember I was arrested while being trafficked in a raid on Bedford Avenue and Green in Brooklyn. I was in a trafficking situation. They raided our apartment. And guess what? I did not mention that I was being trafficked because I was worried. I was worried that by disclosing that I was engaging in sex work, regardless of trafficking or not, I was gonna face another charge, right? So I know for personal experience, and I know by talking with my community that criminalization is not really a tool that is successful to identify or help people who are being trafficked. We are in 2021. It's time to look for other options. It's time to find ways to identify and support those who are experiencing trafficking situations in ways that are reflecting of what they want and what they need. The state does not have the power or the ability to know what everybody needs. And if they do, trust me, what we need as migrant sex workers is not more policing. What we need is services. What we need is linkage to immigration opportunities. What we need is healthcare. What we need is housing. What we need is basic human rights. Policing come as last in my list, and actually it wouldn't even appear in my list. But I have to say, this is the time where we have an opportunity to look for solutions that are not based in criminalization. Criminalization is violent. Most of the times that I face violence in my life as a trans person and as a sex worker, that violence came from a police officer. It was a police officer who bashed my head. It was a police officer who stole my money. It was a police officer who made me run for blocks and blocks. It was a police officer who harassed me every night. So I cannot stress enough how important is that we find solutions that come from the community and for the community, that are not based in criminalization, and that they're not based in a punitive approach. Punitive approach are proven not to work and are proven to be terrible to communities that need support. We need support. We don't need criminalization. We don't need punitive approach. We need community, and we need to create our own solutions for our own problems. Unfortunately, I do have to go, but I want to express my gratitude and my extreme admiration for everybody in this panel. I appreciate you all, and thank you for the opportunity. You all have a good night, and let's keep this work. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining. Good luck with your next event. Yeah, I would love to open it up for anyone else on the panel who would love to answer this question on trafficking and migrant sex work. Feel free to raise your hand or just unmute to answer.
Yo. Ok, yo, ya. Bueno, hay toda una corriente evolucionista y mayormente los países han firmado tratados, han firmado algunos acuerdos que tienen que ver con toda esta corriente evolucionista. Y esta corriente evolucionista viene a involucrar y a meter en un solo saco el tema del trabajo sexual con la trata, llevando hasta tal punto a criminalizar el trabajo sexual. Y esto hace que mayormente justo en la pandemia aprovechen el encierro y los cierres de los locales para la criminalización, inmediatamente tener mayor aseveración en esto, ¿no es cierto? ¿Por qué? Porque actualmente con el tema de la pandemia están cerrados todos los locales de la industria del sexo. Las trabajadoras sexuales ahora nos encontramos en la calle en mayor riesgo, en mayor peligro. La criminalización no nos va a ayudar, nos está poniendo en mayor vulnerabilidad a las mujeres trabajadoras sexuales. Los estados tienen que escuchar las voces de las trabajadoras sexuales. Nosotros sabemos lo que queremos, nosotros sabemos cuáles son nuestras necesidades. Nosotros queremos incidir en las políticas, donde ahí, para que exista cambio, ahora se habla de ciudades inclusivas, ciudades seguras, y en los estados no está cumpliendo con eso. Lo que está haciendo es mayor persecución a las mujeres que ejercen trabajo sexual, cierre locales, desprotección totalmente a esta población, que estamos en mayor vulnerabilidad, en mayor violencia. Eso no queremos. Las profesionales del sexo no queremos que nos vean como víctimas, porque somos resilientes, hemos resistido a todo, ¿no es cierto? Somos pioneras en muchísimas cosas, somos pioneras en trabajar el tema de VIH-Sida, somos pioneras en toda esta lucha, hemos sido la primera organización feminista a nivel mundial, hemos sido las organizaciones de mujeres trabajadoras sexuales, por lo tanto los estados nos tienen que respetar. Criminalizar el trabajo sexual no es la solución, porque el trabajo sexual nunca se va a terminar. Lo que va a hacer es que se cierren los locales, que exista más persecución de la policía, que nos involucren el trabajo sexual con el crimen organizado, con la droga, con todo lo malo, cuando no es así. Las trabajadoras sexuales no nos involucramos en esas cosas, ¿no es cierto? Entonces tenemos derechos y los estados tienen que respetar los derechos. Nosotros tenemos algunas campañas, nuestras vidas también importa, de alguna forma el Estado tiene que saber que nosotros importamos, que aportamos a esta sociedad, que aportamos a este Estado, por lo tanto nos tiene que escuchar el Estado a las trabajadoras sexuales porque somos ciudadanas con derechos, siempre decimos, somos ciudadanas con derechos, que solo cuando los estados quieren los votos, cuando son candidatos y quieren estar en los cargos de presidencia, ahí nos buscan a las mujeres trabajadoras sexuales y no es así. Nos tienen que reconocer, tenemos que estar en todas las agendas políticas, en todas las agendas, en todos los planes, en todos los proyectos donde se vea reflejado las necesidades y las voces de las trabajadoras del sexo.
Yes, thank you so much, Karina. I'm happy that we're able to also get a more international and transnational perspective too. So I'm so grateful for the interpreters also for giving us insight into that and allowing us to connect. Aline or Neri, did y'all want to add on to that?
Yeah, I think both speakers have talked a lot, like very strong message. Police is not the solution, right? And police is the problem. They are the source of violence. And I think it's everywhere, right? Like they are the problem. They are not the solution. And the violence facing by the sex worker is come from the criminalization. So that criminalization is not the solution. And I think for particularly the Asian sex worker in Canada, so like the racism also play a big role, like that, like the anti-sex worker group, that the anti-trafficking organization, many of them is come from the religion background. I don't call them feminists because they love police more than women. So that I don't call them feminists, that they are the anti-sex worker group. They claim they themselves is the feminists, and then they are doing much harm because they just care about the moral agenda. They just care the power instead of the safety of the sex worker. But I think the anti-trafficking movement, they are so powerful, successful, is because they are using the name protection to cover all the dirty thing they do, right? They use protection to cover up, increase the police power, they cover up, they actually criminalize the sex worker, they cover up. The real agenda is not anti-trafficking, but the real agenda is anti-sex work. So that is, you see that they keep conflating sex work and trafficking and pushing the rate in massage parlor and sex worker place. They increase the police power. So for example, in Canada, Ontario, now they are going to have the new bill that to give unlimited power to police, that they can search the place, you know, get the information without warrant. But then even the people against policing, even some activists, they are say, I'm in the movement of defund police, but they are still support this work. It's surprising me because the anti-trafficking group is so successful to make the illusion, to make like this is good thing. And anti-trafficking movement, we see politician is benefit, the anti-sex worker NGO is benefit, and the law enforcement is benefit from the, but who is suffering is the sex worker, is the migrant. So that's why I think we really need to push back the anti-trafficking movement. We need more solidarity. We see how many people here tonight, 63 people. If one people educate 10 people, tomorrow we have like 630 people, you know, to know about the harm of anti-trafficking movement, to know about the importance of the sex worker right. And I think Cecilia have shared a lot of example how police is harming the sex worker community. We should not give them more power. We should not give them more resources. And we also need to stop the anti-trafficking organization to benefit and exploitation of sex workers. So they are benefit by exploiting sex worker. They are getting the funding by putting the sex worker in a jail. They're getting the funding by forcing the sex worker to use the service. And I think that is something we really need to stop it. And I'm so glad to have this panel, you know, like that even we are in different countries, but it's like so many common experience, so that feel so empowering. We need to fight together. Yeah.
Wow, yes, thank you for bringing to light, you know, all of the harms of the sex trafficking industrial project, I'll call it, because, you know, there are so many actors in play, right, that, that, you know, it's not just the police, there are so many other people, civilians, nonprofits, whose work is enacting violence toward, you know, migrant women, transgender women, sex workers everywhere. Karina, did you wanted to add something? Because I saw you unmuted, or Neri, did you want to add something?
Sí, sí. Quería indicar que los mayores violentadores, que son la policía, son nuestros potenciales clientes. Y que las feministas evolucionistas no deben de meterse en nuestro cuerpo. Nosotros no nos metemos en su vida porque se meten en nuestro cuerpo, porque dicen que lo que hacemos no es trabajo sexual. Para nosotros es un trabajo. Para nosotros lo tenemos muy claro que es un trabajo y no nos metemos en la vida de las feministas evolucionistas.
Okay.
And Neri, did you want to respond at all? I wanted to give you some space.
Sí, solo que la luz, no sé si me logro ver porque las luces de mi casa están fallando un poco. Quería agregar sobre lo que no estoy de acuerdo de la criminalización, es que el Estado siempre, o los países siempre crean leyes en las que no nos ven como personas, sino como números, ¿no? Entonces, hacen que hagan falta los recursos, hacen, no sé cómo se dice la palabra, la carencia de recursos. Entonces, los países hacen que haya falta de recursos para que las personas los necesiten. Como yo estoy totalmente de acuerdo con el movimiento Free and All, que deben I don't know, algo está pasando con mi español. Yo estoy totalmente de acuerdo con el programa Free and All, que deben de dejar a todas las personas libres, porque yo creo de que si las personas tuvieran los recursos para poder trabajar y los recursos para poder para poder incrementarse o poder sumarse a la vida de la sociedad, ellos lo harían. Entonces, hacen falta de recursos y las personas tienen que empezar a hacer cosas que la ley criminaliza. Entonces luego les meten presos y hay fianzas. Y esas fianzas son dineros que se van para el Estado. Entonces no están buscando una manera de poder mejorar la vida de las personas, porque si alguien está allá afuera vendiendo su cuerpo para poder sobrevivir, está robando para poder sobrevivir, está vendiendo droga para poder sobrevivir. Entonces, ¿por qué no vienen y hacen como que una implementación de recursos en la que estas personas puedan estar de una manera más segura, en la que puedan sobrevivir? Porque simplemente sacarlos de la sociedad y meterlos a encerrarlos, a que se traumen, a que vivan violencias, a que quieran violentarse a sí mismos en el encierro. Entonces, esa no es una manera de poder arreglar o limpiar nuestra sociedad como el gobierno ha querido hacer con nosotros a lo largo de estos tiempos. La policía no es un recurso, la policía no es un recurso para nadie, ¿no? Y mucho menos para las trabajadoras sexuales, porque son muy abusadas cuando están dentro de estos centros de detenciones. Como dijo Karina hace poco tiempo, la policía son uno de los clientes más fuertes que las trabajadoras sexuales tienen y siempre quieren hacer uso de su rango de policía para poder conseguir un trabajo más barato, para que les cobren menos, para que...
Tener poder.
Sí, entonces siempre tratan de utilizar su representación para tener poder sobre las otras personas, y no solo sobre las trabajadoras sexuales, sobre los negros, sobre la comunidad LGBT. Yo tuve un incidente en el que yo tuve que llamar a la policía hace un año, y te lo juro, la policía vino a ofenderme a mi casa donde yo vivía, y yo quedé traumada para nunca en mi vida volver a tomar mi teléfono y marcar el 911. Entonces, si el gobierno no es quien está buscando una manera en la que nosotros podamos vivir, en la que podamos ser, entonces no es el gobierno en que puede dictarnos cómo vivir o cómo criminalizar nuestras existencias, cuando ellos no están haciendo nada por nosotros. Al final del día, ellos no están haciendo nada por nosotros, es más que quitar nuestro dinero para que ellos puedan subsistir, porque es de nuestros dineros que ellos tienen sus salarios, ¿no? Entonces, si nosotros estamos pagándoles a ellos tienen que hacer nuestras órdenes, pienso yo.
Yeah, thank you so much. You have we have a few big fans in the chat. And that's such a good, everyone has made such great points, especially I think given, you know, in the US, the summer of protests that we've had against police brutality, and, you know, the visibility of the violence against the Asian massage workers who may or may not have been sex workers in Atlanta. There's just been so much more visibility to this issue. And I think that, you know, sex workers have been constantly talking about the abuses of police, but that this is becoming a larger discussion, a much more mainstream discussion. And you know, I guess I don't want to, you know, go into the question too much about policing, because, you know, we've been hearing it over and over again about how police are not the answer. Police, you know, perpetrate the most violence, you know, against it's, you know, the people that they're supposed to protect. So we know that policing is not the answer to ending violence, but, you know, to continuing it. So I would love to, you know, just ask before we get into audience questions, but, you know, what are the resources that, you know, migrant women and sex working women want and need to feel safe, protected and cared for? We know policing is not it. So what are some, I mean, I think that Cecilia has talked about it earlier. Everyone has talked about it, you know, needing more rights, not raids. But, you know, what are some other, you know, holistic resources that folks need right now that would help actually end violence? And I would love to just open it up for whoever wants to answer that.
Yeah, and I think that the issue of policing cannot separate with criminalization of sex work, right? And having full decriminalization of sex work, including clients, third party, and sex worker themselves, is essential, because that is the root of the problem why people experience violence, why they are in vulnerable situation. And so the other big piece for migrant sex worker immigration status is the issue. So that's why Butterfly is also part of the campaign of it's called Status for All. Butterfly is also part of the Migrant Rights Network in Canada, so that we are advocate for the status for all. So immigration status is really powerful tools for the migrant to protect themselves and avoid like all kind of like problem and exploitation. And at the city level, even people may not able to access full immigration status yet, so that censoring city, you know, access with the visa policy, that like people can access support service, health, social service, and community support, everything, without the fear need to disclose the immigration status or like after work. I think this is important. And I think the very, very most important part is recognize sex work is work. It seems something we all know it so well, but I think this is also the root of the problem why sex work is being discriminated, why sex work is being criminalized, because so many people still think sex work as a moral issue, sex work is something is problematic, just like others, because that this is our body, it should be our choice, that no one should take away our right to our body. But like so many religion group, like people with power, they like to keep doing that. And I think the other last thing I want to say is building the community, like with the allies, to support this migrant sex worker community, to build up, to have the solidarity, the network, to support each other. And I think this is also essential, so that I also want to promote a little bit. So April 24th, Butterfly will have an event. So because this is our like 6-year anniversary, so we will have a little bit party like that. Other than always fight against the police, that we also want to have the time to celebrate ourselves. So that feel free to join. I will share the link a little bit later in the chat box. Yeah. And a lot of joy, love. You know, we have a lot of tears, but I think we need a lot of happy moment that we share our happiness and power together.
Yes, thank you so much. I have a question from the chat, or from the Q&A, specifically for Karina. So I thought if we're not able to get a interpreter to join us because we had some scheduling conflicts, then we might end up having to end early. So I wanted to pose this to both Karina and Aneri. But so the question from an anonymous attendee is, can you say a bit more about your point of view that women sex workers were the first migrants? And then for the panelists more generally, how do these experiences construct one another? Oh, it looks like Jose can stay after all. And we also have a couple of people in our, oh, okay, no, both Jose and Ale can stay, if I'm confirming that correctly. So we'll continue talking and I won't abruptly end this conversation.
¿Sobre qué? Bueno, yo creo que una de las cosas ya, yo creo que una de las cosas, a ver, la pregunta. Hola.
Oh, sorry, did you want the question again? Is that a yes?
Bueno, toda la vida las mujeres trabajadoras sexuales, por el mismo hecho de ser trabajadores sexuales, nos ha tocado migrar de un lugar a otro. Y eso es también, el trabajo sexual tiene una dinámica de moverse mucho. Somos migrantes por naturaleza, ¿no es cierto? ¿Por qué? Porque siempre vamos buscando ciudades, lugares o espacios donde por época haya mayor auge de clientes, ¿no es cierto? Inclusive en la época fría baja el número de clientes y nos vamos a ciudades que son costa, que hay playa, que hay inclusive fronteras, que hay puertos donde mayormente hay clientes. Y por eso nos movemos mucho de una ciudad a otra. Y es más, ahora con toda esta migración, muchas mujeres han migrado, venezolanas, colombianas, a otros países con la esperanza de que ahí les va a ir mejor, ¿no es cierto? En el tema de migración, las mujeres por sobrevivencia también buscamos. Esta dinámica también tiene que ver con la economía, ¿no? Con época de economía, con época de auge económico, donde mayormente por temporada hay ciertos momentos, por ejemplo, en mi país, hay épocas de cosecha de camarón, por ejemplo, ¿no es cierto? Que hay ciertas fechas donde mayormente hay mucho dinero que fluye, ¿no es cierto? Cosecha de embarques, mucho dinero que fluye porque los clientes que son los trabajadores de estas empresas trabajan en ciertas temporadas y donde mayormente ganan dinero y salen a la ciudad al trabajo sexual, a buscar chicas trabajadoras Por eso es que muchas veces nos movemos de un lugar a otro, ¿no es cierto? Dependiendo la época, dependiendo la situación, nos movemos porque sabemos en tal lugar, en tal época de cosecha, es donde mayormente hay dinero. Lo que quería aportar en antes también con el tema de que la compañera preguntaba qué cosa hace que el tema del movimiento de mujeres justo en toda esta época del COVID, de la pandemia, nos ha mantenido y nos mantiene es fortalecernos como organización. Eso nos ha mantenido, si el COVID pensaba que nos iba a aplacar, sí, es cierto que nos ha venido a trastocar todo el tema del trabajo sexual, que del cierre de los lugares, pero nos ha fortalecido como organizaciones, nos ha unido a las mujeres, nos ha empoderado. Si el Estado pensaba que excluyéndonos nos iba a callar, no lo ha hecho. Nos ha empoderado, nos ha dado herramientas para movilizarnos, para reunirnos, para mirar cómo un Estado nos excluye y cómo de alguna forma levantar nuestra voz para hacer incidencia, para hacer abogacía, para reunirnos con los representantes del Estado y decirlo, esto es la propuesta que tenemos las mujeres trabajadoras sexuales latinas, migrantes. Esta es nuestra necesidad y no quedarnos calladas. Esta pandemia, si bien es cierto, nos ha quitado muchas cosas, pero también nos ha dado eso de volver nuevamente a fortalecernos los movimientos de trabajadoras del sexo.
I love that point, yes, about how, you know, sex workers are always going to travel to where the resources are, and how, you know, a lot of the times it is, you know, economic hardship and, you know, wide wealth imbalances, right? Just lack of resources that cause people to do what they need to do to survive, whether, you know, that is sex work or drug use, or, you know, sometimes it involves what police would call crimes, right? Crimes of opportunity, but that, that we do understand how, you know, empowerment and resources, safety, security, all of these things, more love, more joy, you know, all of that is gonna keep us way more safe than putting more guns into our community, right? Especially in the hands of people who are not empathetic and do not see us as people. I had another question, did anyone else want to answer that question? If not, I had another question in the chat that's more broad, and I think anyone could answer, about how community groups can support sex workers now, aside from advocating for decriminalization. And I'd love to open that up to anyone to answer.
I think sex worker is also is the intersection of like different identities. So, and sex workers should be also included in different movement, right? So that when we talk about migrant movement, we need to include migrant sex worker. When we talk about sex worker movement, we need to include the migrant sex worker. When we talk about the racial justice, women violence against women, like gender justice movement, housing, like harm reduction. So, and I think this is so important, is not seeing themselves just supporting sex worker movement as the outsider, but sex worker is also their community that they also is responsible to advocate for and with the community. And I think this is so important, and keep sharing the resources, sharing the power, sharing and I think this is so important. And I have to say, Butterfly is still a small grassroots organization, and why we can do different things is because we have the real allyship, and being the ally is important, not to lead the movement, but it's like keep asking, what do you need, what do you want, and what how they can contribute. And I think this is something we learned from before, and we found is so important. And hope today we have so many people here that how you keep educate yourself and other people, and also like follow the leadership of the migrant sex worker, and bringing the change and the systematic change, right? We don't, as Cecilia said, we don't want more rescue. We don't just want the like social resources and support. We need the systematic way to make the change. Yeah. So.
If anyone else wants to answer that question, Aneri, we haven't heard you in a minute.
Oh, no, no había abierto mi micrófono porque cuando es preguntas de cómo pueden apoyarles o un poco más profundizadas a quienes laboran en el área, prefiero de que sean ellas quien respondan y no hacer una sobrerepresentación.
Bueno, ¿cómo pueden apoyarnos? Haciendo justo la población comunitaria, el grupo comunitario, que tiene que ver también con las personas que son parte. Tenemos cosas en común, el tema de la violencia, el tema de la discriminación. Ahí hay algunos temas que también les incumbe a ellos. Y entonces hay momentos que también pueden apoyar en esos procesos a las líderes de las trabajadoras sexuales, a toda esta movilización comunitaria que hacemos las trabajadoras sexuales. Hay momentos estratégicos donde nosotros podemos unirnos con estos grupos comunitarios para posesionar temas que nos vinculan a las dos, a las trabajadoras sexuales y a la población comunitaria, ¿no es cierto? También nosotros somos parte de esa población. Entonces, hay puntos en común que podemos hacer, que es el tema movilización, incidencia, abogacía, manifestación, protesta, muchas cosas que van a dar buenos resultados porque nos vamos a beneficiar todos y todas.
That's such a great point, Karina, especially because, you know, so many sex worker organizers that I know are also a part of many different movements. You know, they're not only within one, and that also, you know, a lot of times you also don't even know who identifies, right, as a sex worker, and that, you know, there are just ways that you can just help the people in your community in general, regardless, right, of asking them to identify themselves. And then also, one point that I did want to make too, off of what Elaine was saying, a lot of the times, you know, within these like smaller grassroots movements and organizations, you know, we don't have the same kind of funding as like big NGOs do. So a lot of the times people are doing this work completely on a volunteer level, and that a lot of that, you know, donations can always help in that, you know, sometimes your like $20 donation can mean a lot more to a smaller organization than it will to, you know, a really large one. So I think that's another way that people can help besides just pushing for policy change. I did get one question that I thought maybe I could ask Aneri if she would be open to answering it from the audience. And maybe it's, you know, through your comrades' experiences, and then also through your own experience. But do police treat cis and trans folks differently who engage in sex work? Or, you know, how, I guess, like police, how police differently treat cis and trans people in public, basically?
Pues, no. No, la policía no nos trata de una manera equitativa. Espérate, tengo algo en la boca. Siempre hay muchas maneras de clasificar a las personas y no hay entidad más racista o más discriminadora que la policía. La policía y cualquier entidad que que le dé fondos a la policía y no nos tratan de la menor de las iguales maneras. Acá en Nueva York es un poco menos ver el que hacen un misgendering o mal pronunciamiento de los pronombres, pero es acá en la ciudad de Nueva York en la que estamos un poco más abiertos, pero en otros estados sí son bastante fuertes. Yo tuve la experiencia cuando yo llamé a la policía, lo había mencionado hace poco, y cuando la policía vino a mi casa, yo estaba vestida con ropa corta, estaba a punto de dormir, pero tenía una incidencia de violencia en mi casa, no en esta casa, sino que en la casa que yo vivía anteriormente, vivía con mis padres y con mi mamá y con su esposo, y el esposo de ella estaba siendo muy violento. Y yo llamé a la policía y yo me identifiqué como transgénero cuando yo hice mi llamada. Yo soy una mujer transgénero y estoy viviendo un acto de violencia aquí en la casa. Y yo llamé a las 9 de la noche y la policía llegó a la 1 de la mañana. Habían pasado 4 horas, ¿no? Y cuando ellos llegaron y me vieron, quedaron bien así mi vestimenta y me preguntaron, ¿usted es trabajadora sexual? Y yo estaba como que, puta, en mi casa me venías a preguntar algo así. Estoy en mi casa. Te estoy hablando que estoy siendo violentada y estás cruzando cualquier otra línea para importarte si soy una trabajadora, que no lo soy, pero sentí que la pregunta estaba fuera de lugar, de por sí que había llegado 4 horas después del incidente. Y fíjate que ellos se fueron de la casa, yo me mudé, pero nunca llamaron para preguntar, normalmente la policía en la ciudad de Nueva York llaman y hacen un chequeo cuando se trata de violencia doméstica. Conmigo nunca pasó así. Y con otras hermanas que he visto, tampoco no hacen como un chequeo para ver cómo están o se les pudo ayudar, poder hacer un seguimiento del abusador. No lo hacen, se olvidan por completo de que las personas están siendo violentadas cuando se trata de una persona de la comunidad, bueno, en este caso de una persona transgénero, porque muchas veces hacen como que tienen fuerza, y he escuchado muchas veces eso, no, es un hombre, y no, somos mujeres, ¿no? Pero la policía es muy discriminadora.
Thank you so much for sharing your experience, and I'm sorry that happened to you. I think that we've learned, how, police definitely don't provide survivors, with any kind of alleviation at all. If anything, it usually exacerbates the issue. And, I also am thinking about, how so many different organizations have to step in, right? Like the ones that y'all work for, in order to actually provide survivors with services, like Womankind here in New York, for example. Karina, I saw you raise your hand, so I would love to hear from you.
Bueno, la policía nunca nos ha protegido. La policía ejerce poder sobre las personas más vulnerables, sobre las mujeres trabajadoras sexuales, ¿no es cierto? Son unos abusadores, aprovechadores, explotadores económicamente, porque muchas veces explotan a nuestras compañeras que les den dinero con tal de dejarlas un tiempo paradas en la calle y ellos coger el dinero. Son nuestros mayores explotadores. Y que estos representan al Estado, por lo tanto es el Estado quienes nos reprime, quienes no nos dan ni garantía ni protección ni seguridad, ¿no es cierto? Entonces están ahí, es el Estado, ellos representan al Estado, por lo tanto es el Estado el mayor opresor de las mujeres trabajadoras sexuales, ¿no es cierto? Yo digo, el mayor proxeneta de las trabajadoras sexuales es el Estado, ¿sí? Es el Estado, ese Estado que no nos reconoce como ciudadanas con derechos, sino como cualquier cosa menos como ciudadana. Nosotros acá en el Ecuador, en el 2014, hicimos alguna estrategia para decirle basta a la policía, basta de la persecución, porque imagínate tú que cuando hay una redada o había una redada para las trabajadoras sexuales, eran 20 trabajadores sexuales y venían 50 policías, como que éramos unas máximas delincuentes, unas traficantes de droga. Y cuando ven a un tratante, a un delincuente, realmente ahí solamente es un solo policía y muchas veces terminan dejándolo suelto que ni siquiera ni los cogen. Pero como somos mujeres trabajadoras sexuales, ahí sí son redadas grandotas, ¿no? Tuvimos que hacer alguna estrategia, les enseñamos a las mujeres a cogerles el nombre de la policía, la placa del carro, la placa de la moto, un día 24 de diciembre, mientras yo estaba organizando la fiesta para las compañeras trabajadoras sexuales, las compañeras me llamaron indicando de que había 2 carros de policía que les decían, putas y ladrones fuera de aquí, putas y ladrones fuera de aquí. Cuando yo llegué a mí me dolió tanto porque justo era un día 24 de diciembre que las compañeras quieren trabajar para poder llevar algo para su cena. Me acerqué al que estaba dirigiendo esa redada y le dije que le pedía que por favor que deje trabajar a nuestras compañeras. A cambio de eso me pegaron, me arrastraron, pero ya nosotros habíamos organizado una estrategia que el día que se diera eso, que sucediera algo conmigo, que todas ellas se vayan y me dejen a mí, que graben, que filmen, que tomen fotos, porque hasta ese día iba a llegar el abuso de la policía y efectivamente esa estrategia nos sirvió. En el momento que el policía me arrastró, me pegó, me subió al carro, todas las compañeras aparecieron de todos los lugares donde estaban escondidas y nos fuimos alrededor de 60 mujeres trabajadoras sexuales presas ese día. Pero ese día marcó la diferencia a partir de ese momento porque ese día fue un día simbólico. Estuvimos presas 1 hora, claro, y teníamos otras amigas aliadas estratégicas de la comunidad, como una intendente de policía que era nuestra amiga y que sabía que me habían llevado detenida, e hicimos toda una denuncia a los medios de comunicación, un pronunciamiento de las trabajadoras, y le hicimos dar de baja a esa policía. A partir de ese momento comenzó la comandancia de la policía a invitarnos y logramos que nunca más la policía vuelva a tocar a las trabajadoras sexuales. Ahora las mujeres trabajadoras sexuales pasan en sus esquinas paradas, la policía las ve allí, pero ya no las molesta, ya no las persigue, porque antes no podía ver. Si estábamos sentadas comiendo, nos llevaban detenidas. Si estábamos en la farmacia con nuestros hijos, nos llevaban detenidos. O sea, era una total violación a nuestros derechos. No quiero decir que todo está excelente, porque no, porque faltan muchísimas otras cosas que hay que trabajar con la policía. Lo que creo es que se debe trabajar muchísimo en sensibilizar a la policía, porque cada vez tú sensibilizas a unos que están allí, luego esos unos son cambiados y vienen otros nuevos. Entonces yo pienso que hay que hacer algo para poder generar como una institucionalización de no a la violencia de género a las ciudadanas trabajadoras del sexo.
Thank you so much, Karina. Thank you for sharing your experiences too. And I'm sorry that that happened to you as well. You know, I'm seeing a thread here of police constantly doing the wrong thing in all the wrong situations. And we have a couple of questions left in the Q&A, but I'm so sorry that I don't think we can get to it. We're about to wrap up, although just to try to answer Danny's question really quick about how community can support sex workers against police violence in practical ways. I think, you know, showing up to panels like this, becoming aware and speaking out, documenting and sharing these abuses, and then also not doing anything right to actively participate in the carceral state, right? Like not calling the police on your neighbors, or, you know, not calling for, you know, more cops in communities. I think that that's one way that we can, as, you know, any civilian or whatever citizen can do to support sex workers from police violence. And I just want to thank everyone, though, who came and shared their deep insight and wisdom and, you know, all the like warmth and power that you brought into this digital space. I'm honored to have been able to meet each and every one of you. And I'm so grateful again to Jose and Ale, our interpreters who stayed on with us to make sure that we're able to, you know, hear all these different perspectives who we respect y'all all so much. And we want to continue to build with you. So I really hope that this conversation is just the beginning, and that we can continue to work together.
Thank you for organizing. Thank you for everyone. Thank you for.
Yes, thank you so much.
Gracias,
and thank you
gracias. Siempre voy a estar ahí presente para ustedes.
Thank
Un abrazo
you.
sonoro
Thank
desde
you
la
to
distancia.
everyone who joined us too. I appreciate